Hello, I'm Penny Thornton and I'm talking astrology. On this video, I'm going to be talking about several things, but it amounts to all the important things that are happening in the next 10 days. Well, a 10-day stretch from the 20th of March through to the 30th. And I mean, you don't need me to tell you that March has been an extraordinary month. So much has happened in the world. And it looks as though March is going out in style. Because we've got even more groundbreaking influences. I mean, I've rarely seen a time like this. It is really, well, it's both challenging to be an astrologer because we haven't seen anything quite like this before, but also it's very enlightening. And, I talk about astrology being a language. It's a language of symbols. And so there are many, a single symbol like a planet or a sign can represent a lot of things. And it's extracting the meaning of all of that what we astrologers do. Some astrologers might see it in a different way, but I think that's one of the ways, well, certainly the way I like to look at it. So what I'm going to be doing on this video is taking you through the spring Ingress charts. Now, this is a chart set for the moment the sun enters the sign of Aries, 0 degrees of Aries. It sets a quarter in motion. So it's particularly used in mundane astrology, where we look at global trends. I'm going to be looking at the solar eclipse in Aries, and I'm also going to be briefly looking at Neptune's entry into Aries. So there are some really important things going on here. And what I'm doing is what I did last time, excuse me, was to split it up into 2 videos. So this one is looking at the nitty-gritty of all the kind of technical astrological things, but also pitching it in terms of what we might expect globally. And then the next video will be doing the same thing, but sign by sign. So everybody gets a chance to really understand what we are heading into. Let's put it that way. So the first thing I want to talk about, well, the first thing I want to say is thank you for my amazing followers. I mean, I feel truly blessed, very lucky. And if you're new to my channel, well, please press the subscribe button and share the information because, it's important it gets out there. And, this is one of the ways that we use astrology in a way that it's really meant to be used for and not trivialize it so much. Okay, that's important. So let's begin at the beginning. And I'm going to begin really with the spring ingress. Now, when the sun reaches 0 degrees of Aries, we set up a chart for the capital of a country. And then that gives that nation an opportunity to sort of see what the trends are for that period, for the 3 months following. So I've done this in 3 this time. I'm going to show you 3 different charts, but basically we're going to be seeing the same influences, but from 3 different perspectives. And I want to get on with that right away. And the first spring ingress chart I want to show you is that of Great Britain. So if we look at this chart, and the reason, well, I've chosen this chart is that so often I talk about things and, we're always looking at Uranus, Pluto, Neptune, and all the nasty fixed stars. And so we get a sense that everything is in a huge state of upheaval. Now, of course, the world is in a huge state of upheaval. But what I really like about this chart is that at the time the sun enters Aries and sets the stage for the next 3 months, we have Jupiter rising. And we can see Jupiter on the ascendant there at the 9 o'clock position of the chart. And whenever you've got Jupiter rising or Jupiter on the midheaven at the highest point of the chart, we've got a kind of benign influence. Jupiter is known as the greater benefic. Yes, there can be bad things about Jupiter. We get inflation and we get all sorts of other things escalating in a way that we don't want them to escalate. But by and large, when Jupiter rises, we've got a sense of good things happening. Jupiter is a very regal planet. And so having Jupiter rising for this quarter may tell us that certainly in terms of Britain, then the monarchy are going to be very important. The monarchy are going to be doing a lot of important things. Leadership is very important. Britain going to be taking more of a leadership role in global affairs. And that's already been happening really since Sir Keir Starmer took it upon himself to put together the Council of the Willing, so to speak, whatever it was called. The Community of the Willing, the League of the Willing, whatever it was this idea that as many countries as possible came together to see what we could do in order to, well, I mean, it's both a case of defending Ukraine, but also a way of protecting the European border. So in a funny kind of way, this Jupiter we've already seen in action. As far as this chart goes, you'll see we've got a whole cluster of planets. And if I take you around from Saturn, which is in the 12 o'clock position. We've got Saturn, we've got the North Node next to it, then we've got Neptune, then we've got the Sun, Venus, Mercury, and Chiron, and they're all contained in the 11th house. So in terms of what the 11th house means in mundane astrology, we're looking at society, but we're also looking at the lower levels of government. If we think about the 10th house in mundane astrology, which is about the government and leadership, the cabinet, the important structures at the top of government. When we come to the 11th house, it's the sort of lower levels of government, city councils, mayorships, that kind of thing. It's also friends of the nation. So when we think about that whole cluster of influences there, we can see how important it is to band together as a group. And again, this is something we've already seen happening prior to this spring Ingress. We're also looking at that Mars, which you can see is very widely opposed to Pluto. But now that Mars is direct, it's going to get nearer and nearer to that opposition to Pluto. In fact, it will reach there on the 27th of April, and that's a very, very significant day in the astrological calendar, and I'll refer to that a little bit later. This isn't a bad chart at all. The Sun is conjunct Venus, and so we get a feeling here that there's a lot of harmony to be found within, the spirit of government, united. And that's also something we've been seeing in England for a while, especially in light of Sir Keir Starmer's actions, that how both sides of the House have been very pro and approving of the measures that he's taken. And this certainly looks as though it's something that will continue to go on. The sort of implicit Mars-Pluto opposition, which gathers momentum through the early part of this quarter, does suggest that we are going to be running into some real conflict in foreign places. But that is a little bit ahead. It's not at the moment. So I'm going to leave that chart and take you to the spring Ingress in the United States, so we can see it really from a kind of different perspective. Now here you'll see that the spring Ingress is coming in before dawn, so we've got planets grouped in the second house of the chart here. They have not risen. What has risen is Pluto, and of course Pluto is all about transformation. So we can see, I mean, everything that's been happening in the United States since the beginning of January. First of all, with the extreme fires, the extreme weather that we had around that time, which completely transformed the landscape. And just recently, there's been more tornadoes cutting across the south center of the country, and that's transforming, the nature of the landscape. But also, since President Trump was sworn in, the speed at which everything has changed. And I made a list of this, actually only this morning. I looked at every day of the recent weeks where something's been happening with changes in government. And in fact, just before I came to record this, and I'm recording this on Sunday, the 16th of March, Mr. Trump made an announcement, which is really, really important. It's he's invoked the Alien Enemies Act. This has only been invoked 3 times, 1812, World War I, and Pearl Harbor, and it does put the United States on a war footing, and it gives President Trump wartime powers. So he has incredible powers by invoking this act. Now, this act has been invoked ostensibly because it is to deal with the invasion of the Tren de Aragua, a Venezuelan terrorist group that is apparently running amok in America. And so this gives the president the powers to get rid of them, which of course is also exactly what he's been trying to do, really, both before he became president. He announced it, and since he's been president, he really wants to deport a lot of aliens from the United States. Now, he has been stopped at this point. A judge has come along and said, whoa, wait a minute, no, we don't do this. But it's very interesting in light of looking at this spring Ingress chart and the solar eclipse that we're going to be looking at shortly, that this isn't just about declaring war on terrorist groups. It would give President Trump a mandate to invoke martial law were the country to get into such a destabilized state. And certainly there's quite a strong voice now from various quarters of the country who are concerned about what's going on with the governmental changes, with Doge, with all of it, you know what it's all about. And so this might also be a convenient act to invoke just in case things got a little bit out of control in the country. So I think that's really rather important, and I wanted to mention that. And what I'm looking at, if we come back to the spring Ingress chart again, we can see that the planet Uranus is quite close to the IC. And when we look at the IC and the 4th house in terms of a mundane chart, we're looking at the homeland. And of course, the moon, which is the home, the people, is in the 10th house. So there's not a moon-Uranus opposition here, but nonetheless, by sort of, you get a kind of feel from looking at the position of the moon and the position of Uranus, that there is going to be some very strong opposition to the government, during this quarter. There may be even attacks on the homeland or attacks from the homeland or within the homeland. So we can see that. And we've also looked at that Mars-Pluto opposition, which, as I pointed out, that's going to be really important towards the end of April. And it is directly to do with the United States and its enemies and its partners being enemies as well. So what we've also seen happening in the past few weeks is this sense that the USA is drawing away from what were once its close partners. And I think we're going to see some reaction from this as we get through the first quarter. Now, I also managed to look at, or wanted you to see, what this spring ingress looks like in terms of Russia. And here again, how about this? We've got Mars rising. So the first house of a mundane chart is all about the nation itself. And you can see you've got Mars there. So the nation is up in arms. The nation is on a war footing. Well, of course, they've been on a war footing for 3 years. But as we know, Mars is moving towards that opposition to Pluto. So there is going to be something significant in this quarter around the 27th of April that's going to make a huge impact on the war in Ukraine. That much we can see. Now, if you look at that great kind of constellation of planets up there at the very top of the chart, it is actually divided. Although, well, yes, it looks as though it's all in one house, but it's not. But don't get carried away. What we've got here is the midheaven at 20 degrees of Pisces and 44 minutes. So we've got Saturn on the midheaven. And as we go anti-clockwise round, we come to the Sun, Neptune, the node, Venus, and all the things that I've been talking about. So some of them are in the 10th house, and we've also got Uranus in the 11th house. But what's significant about this is always, when you're looking at mundane charts, when you're looking at natal charts, is what planets are on the angle. And in this case, we've talked about Mars rising. That makes Mars a really, really strong force. And we just discussed that. We're also going to be looking at Saturn, which is only 2 degrees and a bit away from the midheaven. And Saturn is about the leadership of a country. So we do have some hints here that all is not going well for Vladimir Putin and also the government of Russia. Right now, as I'm recording this, it seems as though he's in a position of power. You know, he's sort of saying, oh yeah, I agree to peace. I think it's a good idea. But hey, it's got to be on my terms. And unless it's not on my terms, I'm going forward and I'm continuing my war. But I think this Saturn says, you know, this is going to be not such an easy thing for him to do. I think there is a growing sense of displeasure with Mr. Putin from within Russia. And I wouldn't be surprised to see some, although we don't see what's going on in Russia, but there could be even plans to, I don't know, not necessarily to remove him. I think that's a big stretch at this point. But the seriousness of the situation for Russia, also because of its economy, is really shown in this chart. And I just want to come back quickly to the Washington Ingress chart. You can see here. And I forgot to sort of make a point of the fact that that whole stellium in Aries and Pisces is in the second house, which is pointing to the economy, to the US economy. And I think we're seeing here a continuation of the concern about the economy. And I'm not saying that, you know, in the next quarter, the fears of recession will be fulfilled. But what I think we will see is more chaos and confusion about the economy. You know, more actions than withdrawing actions, doing this, doing that. And that's weakening the economy. And I think we can see that quite clearly in this spring Ingress chart. So before, or maybe I'll keep that, till a bit later. I was going to talk about, you know, the 21st of March. You know, there is some kind of, I don't want to call it a rumor, because it's more than a rumor. It's people really talking about the 21st of March being this very, very significant day for humanity. And as you can see, that's the day after the Ingress charts that I've just shown you. And I want to, take this apart a bit, but I'm going to do it after I've had a look at the solar eclipse charts. Because, I've been talking about it a little bit in my Friday Bite, been talking about it in my hellos, and I think I want to air just a little bit more of this groundswell of belief and sense that in as much as there is such chaos and confusion in the world, such fears of what may happen, that in tandem with this is this great rise in consciousness and divine energy coming through. And I want to address that shortly. But in the meantime, let's have a look at this solar eclipse. Now, this solar eclipse is a supermoon. It's not the closest to Earth, and that's what a supermoon is. It's when the moon is at its shortest distance from the Earth. That's why it looks so large and looms large over the horizon. The one in April is going to be the closest to Earth. And of course, I've already mentioned the 27th of April, which is that new moon, is a doozy. There's going to be a lot of global stuff going on at that point. And maybe a lot of what's going on now with this solar eclipse is an overture to all of that. So in regard to looking at it, because it's a partial solar eclipse, you won't be able to see the drama of the sun light, his sun's light being struck out by the moon. You will just see it sort of partially struck out. And you will be able to see the partial solar eclipse if you're in the northeastern part of America, Canada, also Europe, and northwestern Russia, I think, and also Greenland. So there are places where you'll see it. And because there is a theory, it's not always brought out in practice, but there's a theory that where the eclipse passes over the path of the eclipse, those areas in the world are most affected by the eclipse. And, eclipses are game changers, and things happen around the time of the eclipse, which certainly mark as really significant events. They change the shape of things. So these countries that I've mentioned are the countries that are most likely, according to astrological law, are the countries most likely to see those effects. But let's take a look at this solar eclipse. First of all, from the perspective of America. And as you see, this is happening at dawn, just as the sun is rising. That's rather a powerful point, isn't it? And there are some things about this chart that I want to point out to you. The sun and moon occupy 9 degrees of Aries. So if you have anything at, 9 degrees of Aries, Capricorn, Cancer, and Libra, or even, 2 to 3 degrees around that degree, then this solar eclipse has got a great meaning for you. Now, at this particular time, we've got Mercury, as you can see here, Mercury just above the horizon at 0 degrees of Aries in the 9 o'clock position. We've got planets gathered around that significant 0 degrees of Aries. We've got Venus at 28 of Pisces. We've got Neptune at 29 of Pisces, 58 minutes. It's got 2 minutes to go before it enters Aries. And we've got Mercury in Aries. And in fact, through these next 10 days, we've got the Sun conjunct Neptune, we've got Venus conjunct Neptune, Mercury conjunct Neptune, because of course, Venus and Mercury are moving backwards and hooking up with Neptune, which is why this is going to be a period of extreme strangeness. There's going to be a lot of things that we don't understand. There's going to be a lot of things about events at the time of this solar eclipse that are like baffling. How could this happen? These are the kind of things we're going to be saying. And it's almost as though one day one thing happens, the next day something else happens that counteracts what was said or done the day before. And it is sending us into a tailspin, all of us, in terms of, our particular selves. But it's doing the same thing in terms of countries and the politics of different countries and global politics. And we can see all that happening. When you've got planets at 29 degrees, 0 degrees, remember these are the critical anaretic degrees in astrology. And things tend to be more important and more significant at this time. And of course, we also have that fixed star sheet at that point. And I pointed this out in the lunar eclipse on the 14th of March. And it's been a big figure on the landscape, this combination of Neptune and sheet. Sheet having a lot to do with water, having a lot to do with things like tsunamis and devastation caused by water. So again, we've got this period of time on the solar eclipse that it hints again at devastation. And even if we think about things not being literal, we're thinking about metaphors, we're thinking about symbolism. We are looking at a deluge, aren't we? And sometimes events and people and situations can act like that. We can talk about going through a tsunami of change, or a series of events and actions that are acting like a tsunami. And I think we see this very clearly in this solar eclipse. Now, there was something else I wanted to point out here, and that's if we go to the bottom of the horoscope and we see Mars. Now, remember, we saw Mars when I was looking at the spring Ingress chart. Now it has moved to 20 degrees of Cancer, 47 minutes at the time of the eclipse. Now that's a very interesting degree, 22 degrees. It is said, you can take this with a pinch of salt, but I'm mentioning it, that it is the degree of the assassin, or you get assassinated. You're either the assassin or there is assassination. That degree is associated with that. Now, before you all go tearing your hair out because you've got something at 22 degrees of Cancer, this is just a sort of, there's just so many ways of interpreting everything. And we could also look at the idea that that degree is also someone who cuts through things, cuts through red tape, doesn't, wish to wait around. Let's get rid of the red tape. Let's get rid of unnecessary rules. Let's get rid of this situation and start afresh. So we see that idea of assassination, not necessarily in its literal sense, but in its metaphorical, symbolic sense. Now, I'm trying to remember the name of the astrologer who actually did these degrees, and I've got it in my notes here because I had not previously heard of this astrologer. His name is Nikola Stonjavic. He's Serbian, and sadly he died 3 years ago. He was considered, certainly in Serbia, a very notable astrologer. And he worked with all the degrees of the zodiac, not exactly in the same way as the Sabian symbols, but it was a way of looking at what the different degrees meant. And this one, of course, has captivated a lot of minds. And there are a lot of examples that talk about this. So maybe in this solar eclipse chart, we've got some hint of that kind of, situation, but it's just a hint. I'm not making a prediction here. I'm just looking at the possible ramifications of everything that's in this chart. Now, I can quickly look at this chart from the perspective of London. Yes, and isn't this interesting? You'll see this here. The solar eclipse, 9 degrees of Aries, up there in the 10th house. But what's interesting, you may even think, haven't I seen this chart before? And you know why? Have a look at Saturn on the midheaven of this chart. We saw it in the spring Ingress chart for Russia. And I talked about the demise or problems in the leadership of the country. So this solar eclipse, this is now something in reference to Great Britain as well. So we'll have to wait and see. Right now, it doesn't look as though Keir Starmer, our Prime Minister, is going to suffer any real setback, although with a lot of the things that have happened, certainly, if we looked at the chart again of the spring Ingress, there was a sense of, I don't just say social disease, but social concern. And this is happening a lot because of the National Health Service, England, NHS England, has been abolished. And that's causing a lot of problems to do with people on disability and things like that. So this is potentially a very, very difficult challenge for Sir Keir. And I think maybe we're seeing a little bit of that at the time of the eclipse. Remember, this is a temporary thing. The eclipse is happening on a day, and we're looking at the stamp of that eclipse on, the times that we're living in. And that does give us a sort of sense that maybe there are some real difficulties that lie ahead for Sir Keir. And also, when we look at that eclipse, Mars and Pluto in opposition across the 1st and 7th house, we are not without enemies in Great Britain. And I think as we get nearer to the 27th of April, we're going to just find out how serious those enemies are. And I think you know who our main enemy is. So I want to come back. I mentioned a little bit earlier that I wanted to address this idea of, this surge in consciousness and divine consciousness streaming through. There's a sense of portals or some kind of energy, for want of a better word. And my feeling about this is that, yes, how wonderful that would be. And if it is real and possible, it's just the sort of energy and changing consciousness we need for these very difficult times. But the problem is, I'm old enough to have lived through at least 3 occasions when this was supposed to happen before. It was supposed to happen in 1987, the harmonic conversion. Conversion. There was another harmonic convergence in November 2003. And these were all periods when divine consciousness was set to stream in through to humanity, elevating us. And, it's a big step for humanity, if you like. So I've seen this before, and we just have to say, look at us now. I mean, here we are. We've got wars all over the place. We've got leaders acting in ways that are of no concern for their people, certainly not elevated, inspired, any sense of spiritual action behind them. And I would say authoritarianism is the exact opposite of some kind of spiritual revolution. So what I do think is that if you look back through history and you think about how far we have come, think about the things that changed humanity, the discovery of the wheel, things like that, gravity, all these things have completely transformed the way we think about the world. And that does imply a change in consciousness. And if we think about the journey we've come in just over 100 years, from the development, the invention of the car, to where we are now, flying around space, gone to Mars, space stations, rocket powered, all of this in just over 100 years. That leap in understanding, in intelligence, is certainly fueling a sense of expansion of consciousness, not quite the same way as divine love or divine energy, but it is fueling a kind of expansion of consciousness. And I think now with the development of artificial intelligence, that's going to be a huge leap for mankind as well, because in tandem with that, we are going to have to evolve ourselves as human beings in a way to be able to work with and not be destroyed by artificial intelligence. So I do see this time period as one of great leap in consciousness, but perhaps not in quite the same way as some other people. Let's hope for the best, but at the same time, let's keep our feet on terra firma, because time and history have shown us that humanity does not necessarily evolve in a way where love is shown to motivate and bring out the best in our leaders and those in positions of power. It may, if it helps each one of us, we contribute to a greater whole in that sense of the collective consciousness. But as yet, we need this to change at a level that means, leaders are making decisions that aren't so dangerous for us all, dangerous for humanity. Anyway, I didn't really mean to get that deep into this, but somehow I got on a roll, and here I am. So thank you for watching. I hope you found it all very interesting. And in a couple of days, there'll be another video which will allow you to see it from the perspective of your sun sign. Bye for now. Thank you for being with me.